So this is chapter 1 of Media and Culture, and this is the third section, which is on the evolution of media, from emergence to convergence. So one thing I want you to know about, we've talked about how media has changed from back, in ancient times up until contemporary times. And the fact that media change is usually driven by technological innovation. So one thing that we will kind of keep returning to, though, is that once a new media has come in, and this new media will end up becoming a mass media, and it's going to disrupt things, there's always kind of a set number of stages that it tends to walk through. And I want you to know these stages, and we're going to apply these when we're doing media critiques and when we're kind of thinking about the media that we consume. The first stage is when there is this technological shift. You've got this new thing that comes onto the market that is a new innovation, a new invention, and it's kind of in the early adopter phase, you might call it nowadays. It's novel. It's something that's new, it's fun, it's interesting. We're not entirely sure what to do with it. Now, lots of things die at this stage, and they never make it all the way up to being a mass medium. But for those that do, they all start off in this stage first, where there's that kind of initial technological shift. Now then, once there's some new technology that comes around, and again, by technology, I mean the book is a technology, then someone's going to try to figure out how to make a buck off of it. Can we find a way to monetize it? Can we find a way to have it be self-sustaining in a commercial or capitalistic kind of way so that we can then distribute it and we won't be at a loss, and we can use this for some kind of profit? Presuming that someone figures out how to kind of take it and make a business model out of it, then you start seeing it kind of be more widely adopted. You see it being disseminated throughout. And then finally, we're going to get to the convergence stage, where you're going to go from having things be disruptive into becoming part. So again, I'm going to just run through this, one more time to kind of reinforce this. So again, we're going to start off with some kind of problem. We've got some technological change. Sometimes these problems are driven by society. Sometimes these are things that no one, they're inventing a problem. No one actually needs it fixed. Now, presuming that this is actually something that has some promise, then people are going to find a practical and marketable use. Again, that's the entrepreneurial stage. If people are able to find a marketable, practical use for this new technology, then we figure out how we're going to market it to the masses. So this is where businesses, PR, this kind of marketing, advertising, we're going to try to figure out how to get it into everybody's home. And this could be the newest app, or again, this is the exact same thing that happened with the radio. Now, it becomes widely adopted, it's mass media, everybody has it, and suddenly it's not so disruptive anymore. So we've got older media, and that older media is going to be reconfigured to kind of fit this newer media because we've got, so much of it out there. So when I was saying about the news and radios and the fact that before you'd have to go out and get the late edition of the newspaper to find out what had happened in the day, and then suddenly we've got the radio and they're able to give you up-to-date information. Well, in the same way that newspapers right now are trying to deal with how, if people are getting their information for free on the internet, how do they keep up? Well, they did the exact same thing back when the radio came out. So now we can really see it in our contemporary world with how things are adapting on a much more rapid time scale, so we can see the shifts in real time. But this has always happened, where older media tries to figure out, okay, this is the thing that it's not just a flash in the pan, it's here to stay and we have to take it seriously. So how are we going to become part of this? So this is where, you get Washington Post on your iPhone. So thinking about convergence, this is a term that was come up with by media critics, and we're trying to figure out how to talk about all of these changes that are occurring in media content and media company, especially in the past 5, 10, 15 years. So this wasn't something, while it still happened, it wasn't something that was widely talked about. Again, we found that change has accelerated so much since the turn of the millennium that we've kind of come up with new words to talk about that change. Now, when we talk about media convergence, it can get a little bit sticky, and that sometimes people will apply it not just to like technological merging of content. So like you would have different media channels in terms of video lining up with radio, lining up with books. You know, the idea that when you're opening up your e-reader, that it flips a page as if you're turning the page on a book. Versus, some people will talk about it in terms of how the Washington Post produces the same content in its print newspaper, which is distributed around the US and around the world, how that same information is available on its online service, that they have an app, that they maybe have a podcast that they put out, and that one media holding, that one company, the Washington Post, has all of these platforms it uses. What we're going to be talking about in this class in terms of convergence is the idea that when you listen to a podcast, that podcast makes references to radio plays that were popular in the 1950s. That when you look at a Kindle, it literally has this animation of a page turning the way that you would turn a page in a book. And that's the way that old technology and new technology are kind of merging into some kind of amorphous third thing that is more than the sum of its parts. So I just want to be clear that sometimes you will hear that because it is a word that is relatively new. Sometimes people will use it in the other way as well. But we're going to talk about that technological merging. Now, in all of these cases, and again, you can tell from the fact that, we go from emergence to entrepreneurial to mass media, and then to convergence, that there's going to be a shift in terms of business. And in the case of contemporary media convergence, in the case of kind of digital media convergence, we find that there is a shift in terms of the economics. So before, we would have people making money by producing content. The TV stations, they would make most of their money by making TV shows, and then they'd sell ads on those TV shows. Well, Google doesn't produce any content. Google gives you information. It serves you other people's content. But they make money by making sure that they have the most relevant information to tell you, and to give you the most relevant content, and then they have advertisers pay them to make sure that they show up higher. So we have a shift from making music, making TV, making movies, to serving up that content. So again, if you look at NBC used to make money by making TV shows. Well, now they have Peacock, and in Peacock, yes, they serve up the TV shows that they sell, that they've made, and they work with Universal and they put in the movies that they've made, but they'll also buy TV shows that are made by other production companies, and they will sell those. So they are kind of moving from, yes, they still make content, but because Netflix, who originally didn't produce its own content, made so much money by selling other people's, and went, I want in on that game too. So, and we're even seeing with something like how streaming goes, that Netflix then went from serving up other people's content to making its own. So there's kind of a reciprocal relationship, and things change. And who knows, in 10 years, if you take this course, you might talk about the flip happening. And again, Google's an interesting one in that it's actually really helped older media company transition into this new converged world because they depend on the content made by those companies. So if all the newspapers around the world went down, Google wouldn't have much to tell you. So they're invested in the creators still doing well, so they're going to help them along. So again, this is an example of Google wanting to make sure that the news that it delivers is relevant and that is good and that is not quote unquote fake news. They're really invested in making sure that the content that they deliver, being other people's content, is as good as it can be. So they noticed, so this is Mashable reporting on Google's changes, the fact that if you want to be listed in Google News, you have to kind of take this oath to make sure that Google wants to make sure that fake news is buried and reduces its chances of spreading, because that reflects poorly on Google. So again, it all really comes down to kind of money, the way the business model is going to work, and that's going to push how media changes occur. So this commercial nature of mass media is really important. And one of the things that we need to think about, and we need to be very critical about, and we're going to talk about how we can critique mass media a couple sets of slides later, but we need to think about, since it is money driven, where is that money coming from? How is it affecting our media? And remembering that if media is supposed to be reflecting the society, who's deciding that? What roles do the owners and government regulators play? So what is allowed to be in front of people's eyes? And obviously with the shift of the internet, we can get things that you maybe would have been buried before, but then perhaps that shows us that those gatekeepers who have the money are maybe not doing a good job. Does that desire for profit affect the media landscape, and how does it do that? Do you feel like you're seeing too much sponsored content that doesn't have actually anything of value to add? And should there be more oversight, or should there be less? What role do we play in that? If we are good consumers of media, do we need Google to bury the news for us, or can we tell the difference ourselves? Or have other people become just too savvy at making it look real that they can fool even the most astute readers? So this is something that I want us to really focus on and to think about when we're consuming media and when we're doing our media critiques, about who's making these determinations, who's deciding what media is going to represent our culture, and what do we mean by our culture? Is it your culture? Is it my culture? Is it the culture of the government and the media owners? And so again, how are we consuming and engaging? We can make choices based on social media. We can decide, are we going to watch Hulu, Netflix, on demand? We can put our own media up. We can live tweet. We're engaging. So we can have an impact at times on the things that we're watching. How many of us have heard of a show that had gotten canceled, and then there was this huge outcry, and they found out that there's a really big fan base, and then it comes back? Or maybe it gets one last run, gets a movie. Or maybe it gets a stage musical. So there is a relationship, and in fact now we're expecting our media to engage with us in a way that we didn't expect before. So again, when we were thinking about who's in control and who can dictate what that media is, can we have a more active role? And can we demand better content, or content that matches what society really looks like rather than what the business people think society should look like?